My name is Vanessa. I am 34 years old and I work as a forensic accountant who specializes in dismantling corporate fraud from the inside out. I spend my days tracking down hidden assets, following the trail of numbers that liars think no one will ever notice, and exposing the people who believe they are too clever to get caught. But the biggest fraud I ever uncovered in my entire career was not sitting in some polished corporate boardroom surrounded by lawyers. It was sitting at my patio table, eating potato salad off a paper plate, and smiling warmly at my daughter as if nothing in the world were wrong. For my daughter Lily's 10th birthday, my parents handed her a beautiful, oversized gift box wrapped in expensive paper. At first, she seemed thrilled, carefully lifting a delicate pink silk dress out from beneath the tissue paper. Then, all at once, she froze. Her small hands tightened around the fabric, and she looked up at me with wide, confused eyes. "What is this, Mommy?" she whispered. I leaned in close, half expecting to find a stain or a small tear in the seam. Instead, I saw a name embroidered across the collar in elegant gold thread. It did not say Lily. It said Brittany Jr. My hands started to shake, but my mind went instantly cold and calculating, the way it always does the moment I sense a number that does not add up. I dug deeper into the box and found the real gift hidden beneath the layers of tissue paper. It was a court-stamped legal petition, formally requesting to change my living child's name to match my sister's. Before I continue with the rest of this story, let me know in the comments below where you're watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your peace from a toxic family that tried to control your life. Growing up in an upscale suburb just outside of Chicago, my parents, Richard and Susan, made one thing absolutely, brutally clear to me. I was the ultimate disappointment. While my younger sister Brittany was the golden child, groomed from birth for high society and country club luncheons, I was the stubborn rebel who chose to marry a middle-class public school teacher instead of some wealthy executive from my father's social circle. When my husband passed away 3 years ago, leaving me a single mother overnight, my parents did not see it as a tragedy. They saw it as an opportunity, finally, to correct what they viewed as the great mistake of my independence. They assumed grief had made me weak and pliable. They assumed I would blindly follow their commands just to keep a fragile peace. They were entirely, catastrophically wrong. The backyard of my modest home was filled with the sound of children laughing and the smoky, comforting smell of barbecue drifting over the fence. I had worked tirelessly year after year to build a secure and beautiful life for Lily on my own terms, without a single dollar of my parents' money. Jamal, my sister Brittany's husband, stood near the cooler in a custom Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, carrying himself like he owned every room he ever walked into. He swirled a glass of expensive bourbon he'd brought himself, looking utterly bored by my modest suburban gathering, as though the mere presence of paper plates offended him personally. Brittany sat beside him, reapplying a fresh coat of lip gloss, patiently waiting for the grand reveal of the gift. I stood there holding the pink silk dress in one hand and the legal petition in the other. The petition was already fully filled out, citing that the name change was in the best interest of the child, meant to honor her beloved aunt. It even had a line reserved for my signature, flagged with a bright yellow sticky note, as if this were routine paperwork I would simply sign, without a second thought. I looked at Richard and Susan. They were beaming, waiting for me to break down in tearful gratitude, or perhaps dissolve into quiet submission the way I always used to. They expected the old Vanessa, the one who used to apologize for breathing too loudly in their presence. Instead of screaming, I calmly folded the legal document and slipped it into the back pocket of my jeans. Then I turned around and walked over to the large gas grill, where the hot dogs and burgers were sizzling steadily, the flames dancing in perfect orange ribbons over the heated grates. Without breaking eye contact with my mother, I dropped the custom-embroidered pink silk dress directly onto the open flame. The delicate fabric caught fire almost instantly, sending a plume of dark, foul-smelling smoke curling up into the clear blue summer sky. Lily gasped, but I placed a steady, reassuring hand on her shoulder. Susan shot up from her patio chair, her face turning a violent, furious shade of red. "Are you insane?" Susan shrieked, her voice cutting straight through the party music and silencing every guest in the yard. "That was pure imported silk. Do you have any idea how much that dress cost? It was a beautiful family tribute." I stepped away from the grill, feeling the heat of the fire radiating against my back. "A tribute?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "You do not rename a 10-year-old child like she's a rescue dog you just brought home from the pound. Her name is Lily. It has been Lily for a decade." Richard stood up, his jaw clenched tight, adjusting the collar of his expensive golf shirt with a self-satisfied tug. "You're overreacting, Vanessa," he said, using that deep, authoritative tone he always used whenever he wanted to end an argument before it even began. "Brittany is her aunt. She cannot have children of her own. We thought it would be a beautiful gesture, a way to bond the two of them together forever. You're a struggling widow, Vanessa. We are simply trying to help you integrate Lily into the real legacy of this family." I looked at Jamal, who was suddenly, conveniently very interested in the contents of his bourbon glass, and then at Brittany, who was playing the victim beautifully, wiping away an invisible tear with one manicured finger. They were trying to erase my daughter's identity right in front of my face, in my own backyard, and expecting me to thank them for it. But my forensic accountant brain was already running the variables, quietly, in the background. You do not spend thousands of dollars drafting custom legal petitions just for a sweet family tribute. There was a hidden motive here, a real financial motive, and I was going to tear their entire lives apart piece by piece until I found exactly what it was. The toxic black smoke from the melting silk drifted low over my carefully manicured lawn, carrying with it the bitter smell of burnt plastic and thoroughly ruined expectations. My neighbors and friends stood completely frozen around the patio, their paper plates half filled with barbecue, staring in silence at the spectacle my family had just created in broad daylight. The silence was thick and suffocating, broken only by the steady hiss of the gas grill behind me. Richard, my father, stepped forward first. He always hated losing control of an audience. He adjusted his posture, straightened his shoulders, and forced a tight, patronizing smile onto his face. "Listen, everyone," Richard announced, projecting his voice confidently across the yard as though addressing a boardroom. "Please forgive my daughter. Grief is a terrible thing. It's been 3 years since her husband passed, but the emotional toll has clearly left Vanessa unstable. We didn't want to make this public today, but given her erratic behavior, I feel I must explain. My wife and I, along with my daughter Brittany and Jamal, have made a family decision. Since Vanessa is a struggling widow who cannot provide the proper environment for a growing child, Brittany and Jamal have generously agreed to legally adopt Lily. We are simply stepping in to give my granddaughter the elite life she truly deserves." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of my friends and neighbors. Lily tightened her small grip on my hand, shrinking behind my leg as though trying to disappear entirely. I squeezed her hand gently in return, keeping my eyes locked on the intruder standing on my property. Brittany nodded solemnly, playing the tragic heroine to perfection, while Jamal stepped up beside my father, straightening the cuffs of his tailored suit with theatrical precision. He looked around my modest, lovingly maintained backyard with open, undisguised disgust. "Let's be realistic here," Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Vanessa is just a spreadsheet checker. She spends her days staring at numbers in a cubicle. Lily deserves to grow up in our gated community, surrounded by real success and real opportunity. She shouldn't be forced to scrape by, living off a dead schoolteacher's life insurance payout for the rest of her life. My late husband had been a dedicated educator who spent his entire career building up the people around him, quietly, without seeking any credit for it. He left behind a legacy of love and respect, two concepts Jamal clearly knew absolutely nothing about. I stepped away from the grill and walked slowly toward the four of them, my footsteps deliberate on the grass. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My profession required me to dismantle aggressive, powerful, and arrogant men on a near daily basis, and this was nothing new. I looked Jamal directly in the eye, watching his smug expression falter, just a fraction, under my unwavering stare. "You do not get to speak about my husband," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel through skin. "And you certainly do not get to stand on the property he helped buy and tell me you're stealing our daughter. You are not being generous. You are trespassing." I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the screen with a practiced flick of my thumb. "I am giving you exactly 60 seconds to walk out of my backyard, down the driveway, and off my property. If I can still see your expensive cars parked on my street when that timer hits 0, I am calling the police. I will have you all arrested for trespassing and harassment, right here, in front of the entire neighborhood." Susan gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace with both hands. "You wouldn't dare call the police on your own parents," she sputtered, her carefully constructed facade finally beginning to crack at the edges. "Try me," I whispered, holding up the phone so she could see the countdown begin. 50 seconds. Richard glared at me, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. He realized slowly that I was not bluffing. The quiet, obedient daughter he once knew was completely gone, replaced by a woman who would burn down the entire world to protect her child, without hesitation and without apology. "Come on, Susan," Richard snapped, grabbing his wife firmly by the elbow. "We're leaving. She's completely out of her mind. We'll let the lawyers handle this on Monday." Brittany scowled, snatching up her designer bag from the patio table. Jamal gave me one last threatening glare before following Richard and Susan out through the side gate, his jaw tight with barely contained fury. I stood perfectly still, watching them march down the driveway in a tight, angry cluster. I listened to the aggressive revving of their engines as they sped away, tires screeching faintly against the pavement. The heavy silence returned to the backyard, settling over everything like a fog. I turned back to my guests, who were still staring at me in shock, frozen mid-bite. I forced a warm, reassuring smile for my daughter's sake. "Who wants cake?" I asked, acting as though I had simply taken out the trash and nothing more. Beneath my calm exterior, though, my mind was racing at full speed. They had fired the first shot today, clearly assuming I would simply roll over and comply. They fundamentally misunderstood what a forensic accountant actually does for a living. I do not just check spreadsheets and file reports. I find the hidden money, the money people think is buried too deep to ever be found, and I use it to destroy them. The harsh, insistent ringing of my cell phone shattered the quiet of my bedroom the next morning. I glanced blearily at the digital clock glowing on my nightstand. It was exactly 7 o'clock. I had barely slept a wink, having spent the entire night mentally categorizing every single interaction from the disastrous barbecue, replaying every word. I reached for the phone, half expecting it to be my mother attempting some hollow apology, or perhaps my father issuing another thinly veiled threat dressed up as concern. Instead, the caller ID displayed the main branch number of my national bank. A cold, hard knot formed instantly in the pit of my stomach. Banks do not call retail customers at 7 in the morning on a Monday unless something is catastrophically wrong. I swiped the screen and pressed the phone firmly to my ear. "This is Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice level and controlled. The voice on the other end belonged to a customer service manager named David. He sounded incredibly nervous, clearing his throat twice before he even managed to speak. Ms. Vanessa, I'm calling regarding the custodial savings account ending in 4821, the college fund established by your late husband. I'm very sorry to inform you that as of midnight, a hard freeze has been placed on all funds in that account. I sat straight up in bed, kicking the sheets away in one abrupt motion. That is a private trust account, I said, my forensic instincts kicking into high gear almost immediately. I am the sole trustee, and my daughter is the sole beneficiary. There are no outstanding debts or liens against my name. On what legal authority has the bank frozen my assets? David cleared his throat yet again, clearly deeply uncomfortable reading whatever notes were on his screen. The freeze was initiated externally by a verified wealth management firm, citing a pending emergency custody transfer. The flag was processed through our priority channel. The requesting parties submitted preliminary court filings indicating that the minor child is being placed under their immediate guardianship due to an unstable home environment. Until the custody dispute is resolved in a court of law, standard regulations require us to secure the child's financial assets to prevent misappropriation by the current guardian. I did not need to ask which wealth management firm had initiated the freeze. Jamal. He was a senior director at a luxury investment firm that managed billions of dollars in client assets. He had the connections and the institutional leverage to push a fraudulent hold straight through the automated banking systems, long before any human being ever actually reviewed the underlying paperwork. He had taken the unsigned legal petition from my barbecue, likely forged my signature outright, or filed it as a contested emergency motion, and then used his corporate credentials to legitimize the whole thing in the eyes of my bank. This was no longer just a toxic family dispute over holiday dinners, or some tasteless joke about a name change. This was a highly coordinated, deliberately aggressive financial and legal attack, engineered from the ground up to completely paralyze me. They were cutting off my resources on purpose. They knew I made a solid salary, but they also knew that fighting a protracted legal battle for custody against a family with bottomless pockets would drain my liquid assets within weeks, maybe even days. By freezing Lily's college fund, they were stripping away my safety net entirely and holding my husband's hard-earned money hostage. "Are you still there, Ms. Vanessa?" David asked, his voice pulling me back from the spiral of calculations racing through my head. "I'm here, David," I replied, already stepping out of bed and walking briskly toward my closet. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. This so-called emergency custody transfer is a fraudulent filing. The individual who initiated this freeze is attempting to manipulate banking protocols in order to extort me. I understand you cannot lift the freeze over the phone without independently verifying the documents. I will be at your main branch in exactly 1 hour. Have the branch manager and a representative from your legal compliance department waiting for me." I ended the call without waiting for his confirmation. My hands were perfectly steady, remarkably so. When my husband died, grief had been a suffocating blanket that made it nearly impossible some mornings just to get out of bed. But this was not grief. This was pure, focused, absolute rage. My family had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Not now, not ever. Jamal thought he was dealing with an emotional, defenseless widow who would panic at the very first sign of financial distress. He assumed I would call my father in tears, begging for help, and ultimately surrender my daughter just to make the nightmare stop. He was about to learn a very hard, very expensive lesson. I walked straight down the hall to Lily's room. She was fast asleep, one arm wrapped tightly around her stuffed bear. I kissed her forehead gently, silently promising her that no one was ever, under any circumstances, going to take her away from me. I called my neighbor and asked her to sit with Lily for a few hours. Then I splashed cold water on my face, pulled on my most intimidating corporate suit, and squared my shoulders in the mirror. It was finally time to go to the bank. The drive downtown was a blur of morning traffic and cold, focused determination. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I mentally cataloged every legal statute I could recall regarding fraudulent asset freezing. I parked in the structure across from the main branch, grabbed my briefcase off the passenger seat, and walked out into the brisk morning air. The imposing glass facade of the bank loomed ahead of me. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors, expecting to head straight to the manager's office without delay. Instead, I found Jamal leaning casually against the polished marble counter of the reception desk, performing for the staff as though he owned the building. He had a styrofoam coffee cup in one hand and was using the other to animatedly chat with a young teller, flashing that expensive, practiced smile he clearly deployed often. He wore a sharp navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. When he spotted me crossing the wide lobby, his smile morphed instantly into a look of deep, exaggerated pity. He stepped away from the counter and approached me, holding both hands up in a placating gesture, as though trying to calm a hysterical woman in public. "Vanessa, I'm so glad you came," Jamal said, his voice carrying just enough volume for the tellers and security guards nearby to hear every word. "We're all so worried about you and Lily. You've been under so much pressure since your husband passed. You need to let the family help you carry this heavy burden." I stopped a few feet away from him, my expression completely blank. I did not raise my voice, nor did I play into the pathetic little spectacle he was clearly trying to create for the bank employees around us. "What are you doing here, Jamal?" I asked, my tone perfectly even and devoid of emotion. He stepped closer, deliberately invading my personal space, and dropped the concerned uncle act entirely, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper meant only for my ears. "I'm here to make sure you understand the harsh reality of your situation," he sneered. "You're completely out of your depth, Vanessa. You thought you could just kick us out of your house and that would be the end of it. My firm manages assets for half the executives in this building. When I tell them a grieving widow is misappropriating a minor's trust fund, they listen to me." I adjusted my grip on my briefcase, unbothered. "You filed a forged emergency custody petition to freeze my daughter's college fund," I stated, laying out the facts as simply and clinically as possible. "That is wire fraud, Jamal. It's a federal offense punishable by prison time." Jamal let out a low, arrogant chuckle. "Prove it," he whispered, leaning in close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "You're an accountant working for a paycheck. I have a team of corporate lawyers on retainer who bill more in an hour than you make in a month. If you try to fight this name change and the adoption, I will bury you in litigation. I will file motion after motion, delay after delay, until you're drowning in legal fees. I will tie you up in family court until you're completely bankrupt and begging my wife to take Lily just so you can afford to keep the lights on. Be smart, for once in your life. Sign the papers. Let Brittany have the kid on paper. And this all goes away, quietly." He checked his watch then, a massive, gleaming custom Rolex Daytona, making absolutely sure I caught the flash of diamonds and heavy gold. He was trying to intimidate me with his wealth, asserting his dominance through luxury brands and aggressive physical posturing. He expected me to fold on the spot. He expected tears, maybe even begging. I looked at the watch, and then I looked up at his arrogant, self-satisfied face. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and quickly snapped a photo of his wrist. The artificial shutter click sounded unnaturally loud in the thick, tense silence between us. Jamal frowned, pulling his arm back slightly, a flicker of genuine confusion breaking through his carefully constructed arrogance. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the sharp, predatory smile of an auditor who had just found the missing decimal point buried in a carefully cooked ledger. "That's a beautiful watch, Jamal," I whispered, stepping right into his space so he could hear every single syllable clearly. "A custom piece like that runs about $50,000, doesn't it? It really completes the image of a wildly successful wealth manager." Jamal narrowed his eyes defensively. "What's your point, Vanessa?" "My point," I continued softly, never once breaking eye contact, "is that a man wearing a $50,000 watch should not have a suspiciously declined credit card when he tries to pay for his $4 latte at the drive-thru across the street this morning." Jamal's face fell instantly. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale in the fluorescent lobby light. His confident posture crumbled, his shoulders sagging a fraction of an inch as raw panic flashed briefly across his eyes. "You think you're the only one who knows people in the financial district?" I whispered. "I build corporate risk profiles for a living. I know exactly what it looks like when a man is overleveraged and desperate for cash. You don't want my daughter because you love her. You need her trust fund because you are drowning." Before he could formulate any kind of response, the heavy mahogany door to the branch manager's office swung open. David, the customer service manager I had spoken to earlier, stepped out, accompanied by a woman in a sharp gray suit holding a tablet close to her chest. "Ms. Vanessa," David called out, still nervous, "the branch manager and our legal compliance officer are ready for you now." I turned my back on Jamal, leaving him standing frozen and speechless in the middle of the bank lobby. I walked toward the office, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor with every step, ready to begin dismantling his entire life piece by piece. The meeting inside the branch manager's office was brutally efficient. I laid out the full timeline for the bank manager and the legal compliance officer, explaining in precise detail exactly how Jamal had used his corporate credentials to bypass standard verification protocols. I provided my identification and the authentic notarized trust documents. The compliance officer looked genuinely horrified and immediately initiated an internal fraud alert against Jamal's firm. While they could not unfreeze the account instantly without a judge's signature, they permanently blocked Jamal from accessing a single cent and flagged his entire wealth management branch for regulatory review. I walked out of the bank with a grim, quiet sense of satisfaction settling in my chest. Jamal was no longer waiting in the lobby. He had already fled the building entirely. I reached the parking garage, unlocked my car, and slid into the driver's seat. Just as I put my key in the ignition, my phone buzzed loudly inside my purse. The screen displayed a photo of my mother, Susan, looking perfectly coiffed at some high society charity gala from months earlier. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the inevitable theatrics, and answered the call. I did not even get the chance to say hello. "Listen to me very carefully, Vanessa," my mother snapped. Her voice was sharp, carrying that familiar tone of absolute authority she always used whenever she felt she was losing control of a situation. I half expected her to ask how her granddaughter was doing, or perhaps to apologize for the terrible spectacle at the barbecue. I should have known better. There was no warmth on the line, no genuine maternal concern. There was only a cold, calculated business transaction waiting to be delivered. "Your father and I have discussed your little stunt at the bank this morning," Susan continued, her anger rising with each word. "Jamal called us in an absolute panic. You are making a massive mistake by fighting this process. We've decided that if you do not sign the name change and adoption papers by Friday, you are completely out. We are writing you out of the family will entirely. You will not see a single penny of the estate, and we will make sure you are cut off from everyone in our network." I gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring blankly out the windshield at the gray concrete wall of the parking garage in front of me. "Are you seriously threatening to disinherit me over a fraudulent custody petition?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "You are trying to steal my daughter, Susan." Oh, stop being so melodramatic, she scoffed dismissively, as though I had merely complained about the weather. We are not stealing her. We are upgrading her life. Brittany needs a child, Vanessa. You know how important Jamal's social circle is to his career. All the senior partners at his firm are devoted family men. Brittany's inability to conceive makes them look incomplete, like they don't fit the proper elite mold. They need a child to secure their status, to host the right playdates, to get invited to the right country club events. I felt a wave of pure disgust wash over me, cold and heavy. They did not love Lily. They did not care about her future, or her happiness, or anything about her at all beyond her usefulness. To my mother, my sister, and Jamal, my beautiful 10-year-old daughter was nothing more than an accessory. A living prop they needed to buy their way into a higher social tax bracket. You were always the selfish one, Vanessa, my mother hissed, her frustration finally boiling over into pure, undiluted malice. You never thought about anyone but yourself. You owe your sister this after you humiliated us by refusing to go to law school. We had your entire life planned out. You were supposed to join your father's firm, but instead, you settled for a boring accounting degree and married a public school teacher who couldn't even afford a house in our zip code. You ruined our family's image. This is your chance to finally make it right. Give Brittany the child she needs, and you can go back to your quiet, mediocre life without dragging the rest of us down with you. The silence on the line stretched out for a long, heavy moment. My mother waited, fully expecting me to cave under the familiar weight of her disappointment, the way I always used to. For 34 years, that toxic tactic had worked flawlessly on me. The fear of being cut off, of being labeled the family outcast, had always kept me in line, obedient and quiet. But the woman she was speaking to now was not the scared little girl she remembered. "Keep your money, Susan," I said quietly, each word deliberate. "I don't want a single dime from your estate. And if you or Brittany come near my daughter again, I will make sure the only social circle Jamal ever belongs to again is inside a federal penitentiary." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat without another word. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply felt a profound, chilling clarity settle over me, sharp and clean. I drove straight back to my house. I walked into my home office, locked the door behind me, and sat down at my heavy mahogany desk. I reached into my bag and pulled out my heavily encrypted work laptop. The screen glowed brightly in the dim room as I entered my security credentials with practiced speed. It was time to stop playing defense entirely. It was time to hunt. I booted up my firm's proprietary forensic software. As a senior auditor, my access level was practically limitless when it came to public financial records, SEC filings, and global corporate registries. I pulled up Jamal's professional profile first. According to his glossy company bio, he managed high-net-worth portfolios for over 50 elite clients. He presented himself as a conservative, old-school wealth manager who favored municipal bonds and blue-chip stocks. It was the perfect cover story for a man quietly nursing a serious gambling problem. Fraud leaves a digital footprint. Always. People like Jamal think they're smarter than the system because they wear expensive suits and use complex financial jargon to confuse their clients into silence. But numbers do not lie, and they certainly do not care about your social status. I started by pulling the public disclosures for his top 3 corporate clients. Then I ran a cross-hatching algorithm, looking for secondary business entities registered under his name, my sister's name, or any slight variation of their initials. For the first 2 hours, the screen yielded nothing but clean, perfectly balanced ledgers. Jamal was careful. But careful people eventually get tired, and when they get tired, they get lazy. I widened the search parameters, running a deep database sweep for limited liability companies registered in tax haven states, like Delaware and Nevada, within the last 36 months. That's when the system finally pinged. A company called Blue Horizon Holdings popped up on my screen. It had been registered in Delaware exactly 2 years earlier. The registered agent was a generic corporate services firm, but the initial filing fees had been paid using a credit card linked to a post office box located in our exact zip code. I dug deeper into Blue Horizon. It had no website, no physical office, and zero payroll. Yet, over the past 18 months, it had received dozens of wire transfers, each one carefully kept just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold, from various accounts associated with Jamal's wealth management firm. He was structuring. It's the oldest trick in the money laundering playbook. He was siphoning funds from his clients' portfolios in increments small enough to bypass automatic compliance flags entirely. I exported the transfer logs and built a full timeline. The frequency of the transfers was steadily increasing, turning from a slow, careful drip into a desperate, urgent stream. But where was all the money actually going? I traced the outbound wires from Blue Horizon. They were not going to luxury car dealerships or real estate holding companies. They were being funneled instead into an offshore cryptocurrency exchange based in the Cayman Islands. A chill ran down my spine as the pieces finally snapped into place. Jamal was not just stealing, he was gambling, recklessly, on highly volatile, unregulated digital assets with money that was never his to begin with. I ran a blockchain analysis tool to follow the wallet addresses associated with his offshore account. The ledger that unfolded on my screen was an absolute bloodbath. Over the last year alone, Jamal had heavily leveraged his stolen client funds into a series of catastrophic crypto margin trades. Every time the market dipped, he doubled down, apparently convinced he could win it all back with just one more trade. He had not just lost a little bit of money, he had incinerated it, systematically, month after month. I pulled up my calculator program and started tallying the confirmed losses across his primary crypto wallets. 5 million, 8 million, 10 million. The final number rested just above $12 million. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting coldly in my eyes. The sheer scale of his arrogance was genuinely breathtaking. He had stolen $12 million from some of the most powerful, litigious investors in the entire city. If his firm ever found out, he would not just lose his job, he would face decades in a federal penitentiary. And if his clients found out before the authorities did, he might face a much worse fate altogether. This was, finally, why he was suddenly so desperate to adopt my daughter. It had absolutely nothing to do with Brittany wanting to be a mother, or with securing their social status at country club dinners. That was simply the convenient lie my parents had swallowed whole to justify their cruelty. Jamal was out of time, plain and simple. The crypto market had crashed. His clients' quarterly statements were due soon, and he needed a massive, immediate injection of liquid cash to quietly replace the stolen funds before federal auditors came knocking on his corporate door. He needed millions, and he needed them fast. My mind instantly jumped to my late grandfather's estate. I had never cared about the family money growing up, but I knew the trust existed somewhere in the background of our family history. I opened an encrypted window and began searching the county probate court records for my grandfather's original trust documents. I needed to see exactly what Jamal saw. I needed to find the specific legal loophole that made my 10-year-old daughter the golden key to his multi-million-dollar bailout. I closed the probate portal just as my cell phone chimed sharply with a high-pitched emergency alert. It was an automated text message from the administrative office at Lily's elementary school. The text read, "Early dismissal approved. Student Lily has been signed out by authorized emergency contact Brittany." My blood ran ice cold in an instant. I grabbed my car keys and sprinted out the front door without even stopping to grab my purse. The drive to the elementary school usually took 15 minutes, but I made it in 7, ignoring every speed limit and blaring my horn at anyone unlucky enough to be in my way. I swerved into the school parking lot and immediately spotted my sister's gleaming white Mercedes SUV, idling near the front entrance with its engine running. Brittany was aggressively marching down the concrete steps of the main office, tightly gripping Lily's small wrist. My daughter was dragging her feet, her backpack slipping halfway off one shoulder, her face terrified and confused. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and cut the steering wheel hard. My sedan lurched forward and skidded to a halt directly across the exit lane, completely boxing in the Mercedes, so there was no way Brittany could drive around me without crashing straight into a brick retaining wall. I jumped out of the car and sprinted toward them, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Let go of my daughter right now," I demanded, my voice echoing sharply across the quiet suburban parking lot. Brittany jumped, visibly startled by my sudden appearance, but she quickly recovered, puffing out her chest with practiced defiance. She yanked Lily even closer against her designer coat. "Back off, Vanessa," Brittany snapped, waving a thick stack of stapled legal documents in my face like a shield. "I have a court order. Temporary emergency guardianship. Judge Thomas Mitchell signed it this morning. You are legally required to hand her over." I recognized the judge's name immediately, and a fresh wave of cold fury moved through me. Judge Mitchell was a regular at the country club. My father, Richard, had quietly funded Mitchell's entire re-election campaign 2 years earlier. Jamal and Richard had actually managed to leverage a corrupt family court judge into rubber stamping a fraudulent emergency petition without ever holding a proper hearing, or even bothering to notify me at all. "Mommy!" Lily cried out, trying desperately to pull her small arm free from her aunt's tight, unyielding grip. "She's hurting my wrist." That was all it took. I did not care anymore about the forged documents, or the corrupt judge, or the $12 million, or any of it. All I cared about was the sound of my daughter's frightened voice, and nothing on this earth, no court order and no family name, was going to stop me from reaching her. I stepped directly into Brittany's personal space, grabbed her wrist with my left hand, and squeezed hard on the pressure point just above her radial bone, applying enough force to make it genuinely terrifying. Brittany shrieked in pain and instinctively let go. I pulled Lily behind me, shielding her small body with my own. "Go sit in my car and lock the doors, sweetie," I told her, never once taking my eyes off my sister. Lily scrambled into the back seat of my sedan and immediately pressed the lock button. Brittany cradled her wrist, her perfectly manicured composure cracking apart into raw, undisguised rage. "Are you insane?" she screamed, her voice cracking as a few parents walking toward the school slowed down to stare. "You just assaulted me. I have legal custody of that child. You are an unfit mother. You are financially unstable, emotionally erratic, and you can't even afford to give her the life she deserves. Jamal and I are saving her from your pathetic, miserable excuse of a life." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, put it on speaker, and held it up between us. "Yes, operator," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. "I need officers dispatched to the elementary school immediately. A woman is attempting to kidnap my 10-year-old daughter using forged legal documents." Brittany's eyes went wide with panic. "You cannot call the cops," she hissed, stepping toward me before she realized I wasn't going to back down an inch. "I have a signed court order from a sitting judge. The police will arrest you for interfering with a lawful custody transfer. You're going to end up in handcuffs right in front of your own child, Vanessa. You are completely delusional." The dispatcher confirmed that officers were already on their way. I ended the call and slid the phone back into my pocket. "Let me walk you through exactly what's about to happen when they get here," I told Brittany, my tone gone flat and deadly quiet. I'm going to hand them my driver's license. I'm going to show them Lily's original birth certificate, which I keep saved on my phone. And then I'm going to ask the officers to call the courthouse and verify your so-called temporary guardianship paperwork directly with the county clerk's office. Brittany swallowed hard, her confidence visibly wavering. Because here's the thing, I continued, stepping closer so the small crowd of gathering parents couldn't hear the rest. I know exactly how the legal system works. A judge cannot legally issue an ex parte emergency custody order without a sworn affidavit proving immediate physical danger. Which means one of two things happened. Either Jamal committed perjury on a federal affidavit, or Judge Mitchell bypassed the electronic filing system entirely just to hand you a physical copy. If it isn't logged in the county's digital registry, that piece of paper in your hand is legally classified as a fraudulent document used in the commission of an attempted kidnapping. Brittany looked down at the papers in her hand as though they had suddenly burst into flame. In the distance, the wail of police sirens rose along the main avenue, growing louder with every second, the flashing blue lights already reflecting off the windshield of her luxury car. She realized, far too late, that she had walked directly into a trap she wasn't nearly smart enough to see coming. My sister was used to getting exactly what she wanted by throwing tantrums and leaning on our parents' money. But money couldn't stop the patrol cars now swinging into the parking lot. This was the real world, and for once, I was the one holding every card. The scream of the sirens grew almost deafening, echoing off the brick walls of the elementary school. Brittany stood frozen on the concrete, her manicured fingers trembling around the fraudulent court documents. The arrogant, untouchable golden child of the family was suddenly, visibly hyperventilating. She glanced frantically toward the main road, tracking the flashing blue and red lights as they closed in on the parking lot entrance. "Vanessa, please." Brittany's voice dropped its haughty edge, collapsing into a pathetic, desperate whine. "You have to call them off. Tell dispatch it was a misunderstanding. If the police actually look at these papers, Jamal and I are finished." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone again. This time I didn't unlock it to reach the dispatcher. Instead, I swiped open the voice memo app, pressed the red record button, and held the phone casually at my side, tucked out of sight in the folds of my jacket. I took a small step closer, close enough to make sure the microphone would catch every single word my sister was about to say. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, deliberately keeping my tone soft and pleading, playing the part of someone genuinely confused and vulnerable. "Why do you want Lily so badly? You've never even liked my daughter. You skipped her last 3 birthday parties. You complained about having to sit next to her at Thanksgiving. You don't want to be a mother. So why are you going to such illegal lengths just to steal my child?" The question landed exactly where I meant it to, straight into the fragile, overinflated balloon of her ego. Brittany had never been equipped to handle real pressure, and under enough of it, her polished facade always shattered into something raw and ugly and entitled. She threw her hands into the air, the fake court documents fluttering wildly in her grip. "Are you really this stupid?" she snapped, her face twisting into a sneer. "Do you honestly think I want to spend the rest of my life raising your brat? I don't want to sit through parent-teacher conferences. I don't want some kid ruining my figure or my house." "Then why?" I pressed, taking another step forward. "Because of the trust fund, you idiot!" Brittany screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Grandfather's $15 million trust fund. He set some ridiculous condition before he died. The money only unlocks when a granddaughter named Brittany turns 10 years old. I can't have kids. That money's just sitting there, mocking us." She was breathing hard, tears of pure panic streaking down her face and wrecking her perfect makeup. "Jamal needs that cash right now." The confession kept spilling out of her like a broken dam. "He made some bad trades. He lost a lot of client money. If we don't get that 15 million transferred into our accounts by Friday, the federal regulators are going to find out. Jamal is going to federal prison, Vanessa. They'll take our house. They'll take my cars. I'll be poor. We need your daughter legally named Brittany today, so we can claim the trust tomorrow. That is the only reason any of this is happening. I stared at her, letting the full, sickening weight of her confession settle into the cold air between us. She had just admitted, out loud, to a criminal conspiracy. She'd confessed that she and her husband were attempting to kidnap a minor, commit identity fraud, and manipulate a legal trust to cover up a multi-million-dollar federal crime. I reached down and tapped the red square on my screen. The recording saved itself instantly and uploaded automatically to my secure cloud server. 2 police cruisers swerved into the school parking lot, tires screeching as they blocked the exits. 4 officers climbed out, hands resting near their duty belts as they approached us. Brittany gasped, realizing all at once that her hysterical rant had carried clean across the empty lot. She turned to me, eyes wide with terror. "Please," she whispered. "Don't tell them." I looked at my sister and felt nothing but contempt. I turned instead to the approaching officers. "Good afternoon, officers," I said calmly. "I'm the one who called. This woman is attempting to remove my daughter from school property using falsified legal documents. I'd strongly recommend you run the docket number on those papers through the county clerk's database right now." One of the officers stepped toward Brittany and held out his hand for the documents. She was shaking so badly she could barely pass them over. I didn't stay to watch her try to talk her way out of it. I turned my back on her, walked to my car, unlocked the doors, and slid into the driver's seat. It was time to find out exactly what my grandfather had written into that trust. I pulled into my driveway with the adrenaline from the school parking lot still coursing through my veins, parked, and walked Lily inside, locking the heavy oak front door behind us. I made her a snack, put on her favorite movie in the living room, and told her everything was completely fine. Once she was settled, I went into my home office and locked the door behind me. I sat down at my desk, opened my encrypted laptop, and logged straight into the county probate court portal. My grandfather had passed away 6 years earlier. He'd been a ruthless corporate raider who built a massive fortune and ruled our family with an iron fist, and he had always favored Brittany. He loved her superficial charm and her willingness to manipulate people, traits he considered essential for survival in high society. When he died, the estate was kept tightly confidential, but as a direct descendant, I still had the legal right to request the unredacted filings. I paid the expedited access fee and downloaded the massive PDF containing his last will and testament, along with the founding documents for his various family trusts. I skipped past the standard bequests. I already knew he'd left the bulk of the estate to my parents. What I was looking for was the specific financial vehicle Brittany had been screaming about in the parking lot. I used the search function to scan for her name, and the software highlighted a section buried deep on page 47. It was an irrevocable generation-skipping trust. The principal listed was exactly $15 million. I leaned closer to the screen, scanning through the dense legal jargon. The terms were bizarre, but entirely characteristic of my grandfather's controlling nature. He'd wanted his legacy to continue through his favorite granddaughter, but he'd insisted on dictating exactly how it happened. The trust stipulated that the $15 million would remain locked in a high-yield investment account, untouched by anyone, including my own parents. The funds would only be released upon one very specific triggering event. Brittany had to produce a biological or legally adopted daughter, and that daughter had to be legally named Brittany Jr. But that wasn't the only condition. My grandfather had been notoriously suspicious of people marrying into the family purely for money. So, to make sure any child was actually being raised within the family tradition and not simply used for a quick payout, he'd built in a chronological failsafe. The trust wouldn't unlock at the child's birth, or even at her adoption. The money would only be released on her 10th birthday. The sheer deviousness of the whole scheme washed over me like a bucket of ice water. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen as every piece of the puzzle snapped violently into place. Lily had just turned 10. Yesterday had been her actual birthday. That was why they'd shown up to the barbecue with a custom embroidered dress. That was why they'd filed the emergency custody petition and the name change petition on the exact same day. Jamal hadn't just stumbled into some bad crypto trade the day before. He'd been drowning in debt for months. He and Brittany must have known about this specific clause in the trust for years. When they realized Brittany was infertile and couldn't produce an heir to unlock the money, they'd turned their sights on my daughter instead. They'd bided their time, waiting until Lily was exactly the right age. If they could force through an adoption and a name change on paper this week, they could present the newly minted court documents to the trust's executor by Friday. The executor would see a legally adopted daughter, named Brittany Jr., who happened to be exactly 10 years old. The conditions would be met. $15 million would be wired immediately into a joint account controlled by Brittany and Jamal. Jamal would take the money, quietly replace the $12 million he'd stolen from his wealthy clients, and pocket the remaining $3 million to keep funding his lavish lifestyle. My father, Richard, had orchestrated the entire legal strategy. He'd paid off a corrupt family court judge to push the paperwork through without a hearing. My own parents had been perfectly willing to strip my daughter of her identity, tear her away from her loving mother, and hand her over to a desperate criminal, all to protect the family's reputation from the scandal of Jamal's impending federal indictment. They were completely willing to destroy my life to save his. It was a betrayal so deep, so thoroughly rotten, that it wiped out every last trace of familial obligation I still carried in my heart. They weren't my parents anymore. They weren't my sister and brother-in-law anymore. They were hostile corporate entities attempting a hostile takeover of the single most precious thing I had. My phone buzzed against the mahogany desk, jolting me out of my thoughts. It was a text from my father. "Meet me at the Oak Ridge Country Club in 30 minutes. Come alone." It wasn't a request. It was a summons, from a man who was entirely used to having his orders followed without a single question asked. Under normal circumstances, I would have ignored it completely. But now that I knew exactly what they were trying to steal, I wanted to look him dead in the eye. I wanted to witness the exact moment he realized his obedient daughter was gone for good. I left Lily safely at home with my trusted next-door neighbor and drove clear across town to the sprawling, hyper-exclusive Oak Ridge Country Club. My father had been a member there for 40 years. It was a fortress built out of old money, leather armchairs, and quietly corrupt deals sealed over expensive scotch. I walked past the concierge, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor, and found Richard sitting alone in the dim, wood-paneled private lounge at the back of the clubhouse. He was dressed in tailored golf attire, sipping a glass of neat whiskey, looking utterly relaxed, as though he hadn't spent the earlier part of the day orchestrating an illegal attempt to kidnap his own granddaughter. "Sit down, Vanessa," he said, gesturing toward the heavy leather chair across the small table. He didn't look angry. He looked like a CEO preparing to negotiate a merger. I remained standing. "I don't have time to sit, Richard. Say whatever it is you dragged me here to say." He sighed, shaking his head with a patronizing little smile. "You always did have to make things so difficult. Your sister called me from the elementary school in absolute hysterics. You really overreacted today, but I'm a pragmatic man, and I understand you felt cornered. So I'm going to make this very simple and very fair for everyone involved." He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a pristine checkbook, and clicked his gold pen. He scribbled a few lines, tore the check free, and slid it across the polished mahogany table toward me. The numbers were written in his bold, aggressive handwriting. $200,000. "Take the money," Richard said softly, leaning back and swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Take the money and sign the name change and adoption papers by tomorrow morning. It's only on paper, Vanessa. You'll still get to see Lily on weekends. Use the cash to pay off your mortgage. Take a long vacation. Whatever you like. Don't be stubborn about this. I stared down at the check. You want to buy my daughter for $200,000? I asked, my voice gone dangerously flat. Don't be so dramatic, he countered smoothly. I'm compensating you for your cooperation. Jamal made a mistake. A very expensive one. If federal regulators get a look at his ledgers, he goes to prison. Brittany's life is ruined. The family name gets dragged through the mud. We simply cannot let that happen. That trust money is just sitting there doing nothing. Your grandfather intended for Brittany to have it eventually anyway. We're only accelerating the timeline. By committing federal wire fraud, identity theft, and extortion, I replied, my tone turning to ice. It's only a crime if someone complains. Richard's polite mask slipped entirely, revealing the ruthless manipulator underneath. You're a widow with a mediocre accounting job. You cannot fight my lawyers. If you refuse this offer, Jamal will make sure you lose your job. I will make sure you lose your house. We will drag you through family court until you are completely bankrupt and broken. Take the deal, Vanessa. Don't ruin Jamal's life just to prove a point. I looked at my father, at a man perfectly willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood to protect the reputation of a criminal. I reached down and slowly picked up the heavy paper check. Richard smiled with satisfaction, clearly assuming I had finally recognized my place and fully surrendered. Instead of tucking it into my purse, I gripped the edges and, slowly and deliberately, tore it in half. His smile vanished instantly. I put the two halves together and tore them again, ripping his bribe into small, jagged pieces, and without breaking eye contact, dropped every shredded scrap directly into his glass of expensive whiskey. You fundamentally misunderstand the situation, Richard, I said, leaning across the table. I'm not the one who's cornered here. You don't have enough money to buy my daughter, and you don't have enough lawyers to save Jamal from what's coming for him. I turned my back on him and walked straight out of the dark lounge, leaving him sitting there in stunned silence, staring down at his ruined, paper-filled whiskey. It was finally time to go to war. The next morning, I drove downtown to the financial district, my mind completely locked onto the meticulous work of drafting a federal whistleblower report. Traffic was heavy, but I barely registered the sea of brake lights ahead of me. I was too busy mentally outlining the exact statutes Jamal had violated, preparing to use every resource at my office's disposal to submit irrefutable evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I parked in the underground garage of my firm, ready at last to end this nightmare. But the moment I stepped off the elevator onto the 42nd floor, I knew something was badly wrong. The usual morning hum of the office was missing entirely. The receptionist wouldn't meet my eyes, suddenly finding her keyboard endlessly fascinating. When I approached the heavy glass doors of my department, my keycard flashed red. Access denied. A cold, creeping sense of dread washed over me. Before I could even ask the receptionist to override the security system, the heavy wooden door of the executive suite swung open. My department head, a stern, deeply analytical man named Mr. Campbell, stepped out. He offered no morning greeting, no polite smile. "Vanessa, we need you in the senior partner's office right now," he said, his voice stripped of all warmth, gesturing for me to follow him down the long, carpeted hallway. I didn't ask why. In the world of corporate forensic accounting, an immediate summons to the senior partner's office paired with a deactivated security badge meant exactly one thing. You were under investigation, and you were very likely about to be fired. I followed him with my posture straight and my face carefully blank. We walked into the sprawling corner office of the managing partner. A woman from Human Resources was already seated at the conference table, a thick manila folder resting ominously in front of her. Mr. Campbell closed the door behind us, and the heavy click of the lock echoed through the quiet room. "Have a seat, Vanessa," he instructed, pointing toward the leather chair across from the HR representative. I sat, setting my briefcase down beside my feet. Mr. Campbell circled his large oak desk and remained standing, looking down at me with an expression of profound professional disappointment. Late last night, the firm received a highly detailed anonymous whistleblower complaint, directed specifically at you, he began, his tone strictly administrative. The complaint included digital logs and forged financial ledgers suggesting that you've been using our proprietary forensic software to embezzle funds from our mid-tier corporate clients. The anonymous source claims you've been quietly siphoning small amounts of cash into offshore accounts over the past 6 months to cover massive personal debts. He slid a few printed pages across the desk toward me. I glanced down at them. They were remarkably well fabricated. Jamal had clearly hired someone with real access to mock-up network addresses and transaction hashes closely mirroring my actual daily login patterns. He'd even included a fake financial dossier suggesting I was facing foreclosure on my own home, painting the pathetic picture of a desperate widow turning to corporate theft. It was practically a mirror image of his own miserable reality. Jamal had probably spent the entire night orchestrating this hit. He knew that as long as I kept my job, I had the financial stability to fight him in court, and more importantly, the digital tools to expose his massive fraud to the entire world. So he'd decided to strike straight at the heart of my independence. "Vanessa, you know how seriously we take the integrity of our auditors," the HR representative chimed in, her voice flat and rehearsed. "Given your access to sensitive corporate financial data, we cannot afford to ignore allegations like these. While we conduct our own internal review, company policy requires us to take immediate action to protect our clients. You're being placed on indefinite administrative leave, effective right now. We're required to confiscate your company laptop, your phone, and your access badges. If the investigation confirms these allegations, you'll face immediate termination, and the findings will be handed over to law enforcement. You'll also be barred from practicing accounting in this state." They were taking everything. Jamal was trying to disarm me completely. Without my company laptop, I'd lose access to the encrypted cloud servers where I stored the blockchain analysis proving he'd burned through $12 million of his clients' money. Jamal thought he'd backed me into an inescapable corner. He wanted me to call my father, crying and defeated, willing to trade Lily away for a chance to clear my name. I looked at Mr. Campbell, and then at the HR representative. They expected me to panic, to mount some desperate, tearful defense, begging for my job back. I did none of those things. I reached down, picked up my leather briefcase, set it squarely on the polished conference table, and popped the brass latches. The sharp metallic click echoed through the quiet room like a gunshot. I wasn't going to let Jamal destroy my career to save his own skin. It was time to show them exactly why I was the best forensic accountant in the building. I lifted the heavy lid of the case. The HR representative shifted uncomfortably in her seat, no doubt expecting me to pull out a box of tissues or a hastily written resignation letter. Instead, I withdrew a massive, 300-page physical dossier. I'd spent the entire night printing and binding every single digital footprint I'd uncovered. I knew Jamal would try to cut off my access to the company's servers, so I'd brought hard copies of everything. I slid the thick binder across the mahogany table until it landed directly in front of Mr. Campbell. "What is this?" he asked, eyeing it with cautious suspicion. "That is the real whistleblower report," I said, keeping my voice level and commanding. "The anonymous complaint you received this morning was a fabricated distraction designed to silence me. The man who sent it is Jamal, a senior wealth manager at Apex Capital. He's also my brother-in-law. Over the last 18 months, Jamal has embezzled exactly $12.4 million from his high net worth clients to cover catastrophic losses in offshore cryptocurrency markets. The HR representative frowned and leaned forward aggressively. Vanessa, this is a transparent distraction from the serious allegations against you, she said, her tone snapping back into strict administrative mode. We are not here to discuss your family disputes or wild conspiracy theories. I ignored her completely and kept my eyes locked on my department head. Open the binder, Mr. Campbell, I urged softly. Look at the client list on page 4. Look at the names of the people Jamal's been stealing from. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before flipping the heavy cover open. The room went utterly silent as I watched his eyes travel down the list of defrauded investors. I knew exactly what he was seeing. 3 of the individuals Jamal had stolen from weren't just Apex Capital clients. They were mutual clients, billionaire real estate developers and tech executives whose corporate taxes and personal wealth audits were handled exclusively by our own firm. If they ever found out they'd been robbed blind while we were supposed to be monitoring their financial health, our firm would be facing catastrophic malpractice lawsuits. Mr. Campbell's face drained to a pale, sickly white. He flipped rapidly through the following pages, his eyes darting across wire transfer logs, the shell company registration documents for Blue Horizon Holdings, and the blockchain ledgers tracing the stolen funds directly to the Cayman Islands. He's structuring the withdrawals in increments just under $10,000 to dodge automatic federal reporting, Mr. Campbell whispered, tracing a finger over the printed spreadsheets. The methodology's sloppy, but the volume is absolutely staggering. This is a massive federal crime. And he's panicking, I added, leaning forward. He needs a sudden influx of cash to replace the stolen principal before the next round of quarterly federal filings. He's attempting to illegally adopt my 10-year-old daughter to unlock a $15 million family trust. When I blocked the fraudulent adoption yesterday, he sent that fake complaint to get me fired, hoping I'd lose my financial footing and hand my child over out of pure desperation. Mr. Campbell closed the binder. He took a long breath, removed his silver-rimmed glasses, and pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. The stern administrative mask he'd worn only moments earlier had completely dissolved. He turned to the HR representative. Tear up the suspension paperwork, he ordered sharply. Reactivate her keycard and unfreeze her network access immediately. The representative looked genuinely stunned. But sir, standard company policy dictates that we investigate. To hell with company policy, Mr. Campbell snapped, his voice echoing, investigate. To hell with company policy, Mr. Campbell snapped, his voice echoing through the large executive office. This woman just saved our firm from a multi-million-dollar liability nightmare. If Jamal goes down and takes our mutual client's money with him, the fallout would gut our reputation across the entire financial district. We are going to be the ones who catch him. We are going to hand this criminal over on a silver platter. He turned back to me, a fierce, predatory gleam lighting up his eyes. You are not suspended, Vanessa. In fact, I'm pulling you off all your regular accounts. Your only job right now is to nail this arrogant bastard to the wall. I'm giving you unlimited access to our senior legal counsel. I want our most ruthless corporate lawyers helping you draft the official SEC whistleblower submissions by this afternoon. We will help you build an airtight case for the FBI. Nobody threatens an auditor in my department and walks away clean. A wave of pure relief and vindication washed over me. Jamal had thought that stripping away my family would leave me isolated and weak. He'd thought leveraging his corporate power would easily crush a single mother, but he had fundamentally misjudged the loyalty of the financial world. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. I had just weaponized one of the most powerful accounting firms in the city, and we were about to go to war. Mr. Campbell moved fast to protect our mutual clients. By noon, I'd been relocated to a highly secure conference room on the top floor, a space normally reserved for multi-billion-dollar corporate mergers, now serving as my personal war room. 4 of the firm's most aggressive corporate litigators were assigned to work alongside me. We locked the heavy glass doors, ordered a massive pot of black coffee, and powered up our encrypted laptops. The hunt was officially sanctioned, and I now had an entire army of legal experts behind me, ready to make sure Jamal never saw daylight again. I was ready to ruin his life, and so were they. The next 48 hours blurred into a relentless, adrenaline-fueled marathon. While the rest of the city slept, the fluorescent lights in our war room burned bright straight through the night. I stood in front of a massive digital whiteboard, mapping out Jamal's tangled web of financial deceit, tracing every last dollar he'd stolen from his high-net-worth clients. I linked the fraudulent withdrawals from Apex Capital directly to the Delaware shell company, Blue Horizon Holdings. The lawyers worked beside me, drafting supporting affidavits and cross-checking federal statutes. We didn't just find the $12 million. We tracked the exact IP addresses Jamal had used to initiate the wire transfers, matching the timestamps directly to his corporate network login credentials. He had literally stolen millions of dollars while sitting comfortably at his desk during normal office hours, sipping his expensive corporate coffee. Jamal had assumed moving the stolen funds into an offshore cryptocurrency exchange would make them invisible to traditional banking oversight. He'd trusted in the myth of digital anonymity, but digital ledgers are permanent and entirely public, if you know how to read them. I ran advanced blockchain analytics, matching the wallet addresses in the Cayman Islands to an account registered under a fabricated corporate entity. Digging through the incorporation documents, I found that the fake entity shared a physical mailing address with a commercial property owned by my own father, Richard. The sheer arrogance of the setup was staggering. Jamal had been using his connection to my family to anchor his entire criminal enterprise. Every trade Jamal made, every catastrophic loss he racked up when the crypto market dipped, was meticulously documented, time-stamped, and printed into undeniable hard copy evidence. Whenever my eyes grew heavy, I thought about Lily, about the terrified look on her face when Brittany grabbed her wrist in that school parking lot. That memory was all the fuel I needed to keep going. With the financial autopsy complete, it was time to draft the execution orders. I sat down at my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as I prepared the official whistleblower submission for the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC doesn't take anonymous tips lightly, but a thoroughly documented report from a senior auditor at a top-tier corporate firm gets treated as absolute gospel. I laid out the exact mechanisms of Jamal's fraud, highlighting his violation of fiduciary duty and his systemic abuse of client trust. The lawyers reviewed every sentence carefully, making sure the language was completely airtight and legally devastating. But the SEC was only the first warhead in our arsenal. I opened a second document and began drafting an expedited report for the Internal Revenue Service. Arrogant criminals often forget that illegally obtained money is still subject to federal taxation. By failing to report the $12 million he'd embezzled as income, Jamal had committed massive, undeniable tax evasion on top of everything else. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division is notoriously aggressive, and it holds the unilateral authority to freeze assets and seize property without waiting for a lengthy trial. I laid out his offshore tax havens and structured deposits in full detail, handing federal agents the perfect open and shut case of deliberate tax fraud. They would strip him of his expensive house, his cars, and his custom-tailored suits before he ever set foot inside a federal courtroom. By dawn on Thursday, the nuclear code was fully compiled. The final package was a sprawling masterpiece of forensic accounting, over 500 pages of certified bank statements, IP logs, encrypted emails, and federal statutes, all bound together in one thick black binder. Mr. Campbell strode into the conference room carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He glanced at the towering stack of evidence sitting at the center of the table and allowed himself a grim, satisfied smile. We had built the ultimate weapon. Now, all we needed was the perfect moment to detonate it for maximum collateral damage, a public setting where he couldn't hide behind his overpriced lawyers. And, as if on cue, my phone buzzed loudly against the table, lighting up with a new email from my mother. It would hand me the exact stage I needed to finally end this war for good. I tapped the screen and opened the message. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't an apology for her monstrous behavior. It was an extravagant, digitally animated invitation to the annual Oakbridge Country Club charity gala. The digital envelope unfurled with a flourish, revealing ornate gold script against a stark black background. My parents hosted this event every single year. It was the crown jewel of their social posturing, a glittering evening where the wealthiest families, corporate executives, and local politicians gathered to sip champagne and pretend they actually cared about philanthropy. It was exactly the kind of high society gathering Jamal used to troll for new wealthy clients. I scrolled past the lavish description of the catered dinner and the silent auction. Buried at the very bottom, beneath the formal dress code requirements, was a personal note from Susan. Her tone was sickeningly smug, radiating the total confidence of a woman convinced she held every card. It was brief, and utterly devoid of anything resembling maternal warmth. "Vanessa," it read, "this is your last chance to sign the papers. Bring the executed documents to the gala tomorrow night. If you do not comply, my lawyers will take Lily by force on Monday morning. Do not embarrass us." I read it twice, letting the sheer audacity of the threat settle in. She genuinely believed she could summon me to a ballroom, surround me with her wealthy friends, and pressure me into handing over my 10-year-old daughter like an unwanted piece of luggage. She thought the mere threat of a brutal legal battle would break me over a single weekend. Susan and Richard had spent so many years buying their way out of every problem that they couldn't conceive of a reality where money bought them nothing. They assumed I was sitting at home, sobbing, desperately trying to figure out how I'd ever afford a lawyer. They had no idea I'd just spent 2 straight days inside a secure corporate war room, flanked by some of the most ruthless litigators in the city. They had no idea I had already dismantled Jamal's entire criminal empire, piece by piece. I clicked reply. I didn't write a lengthy defense. I didn't beg. And I didn't appeal to whatever scrap of humanity my mother might still have buried somewhere inside her. I typed one word. Yes. I hit send, confirmed my attendance, and locked my phone. If they wanted a public spectacle, I would happily give them one. I closed my laptop, thanked Mr. Campbell and the legal team for their tireless work, and left the firm. I drove straight to an upscale boutique downtown. For 3 years I had dressed in muted, forgettable colors, the invisible uniform of a grieving widow. But tomorrow night, I wasn't going to play the victim. I was going to be the executioner. I needed armor. I chose a stunning emerald green evening gown, the kind that radiated confidence and quiet power. I bought matching heels and booked an appointment to have my hair and makeup done. When I got home, Lily was at the kitchen table drawing a picture. I pulled her into a tight hug, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. Then I called my neighbor, a retired school principal who adored Lily, and asked if she could watch her Saturday evening. I told her I had an important work event running late. She agreed happily, with no idea the work event involved dismantling my toxic family in front of an entire ballroom. Friday slipped by in a haze of quiet anticipation. I printed a second copy of the forensic dossier, sliding the explosive documents into a sleek leather portfolio I could carry alongside my evening bag. I reviewed the wire transfer logs, the offshore crypto account records, and the fraudulent custody filings one final time, burning every last number into memory. Jamal was going to try to humiliate me. He was going to lean on his physical presence and his expensive suit to intimidate me into signing away my own child. Saturday evening finally arrived. The sun sank low, throwing long, dark shadows across my driveway. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing the emerald fabric of my gown. I barely recognized myself. The tired, overwhelmed mother was gone. In her place stood a highly trained forensic accountant carrying a nuclear bomb. I picked up my keys and the leather portfolio. It was time to go to the gala. It was time to show them exactly what happens when you try to steal from a woman who audits thieves for a living. I stepped outside, locked the front door behind me, and let the cool evening air settle against my emerald silk gown. But I didn't drive straight to the Oakbridge Country Club. I had one final crucial stop to make first. Earlier that morning, my department head, Mr. Campbell, had used his extensive network to bypass the usual federal reporting channels entirely. He'd arranged a private, off-the-books meeting for me with a senior investigator from the FBI. I pulled my sedan into the empty, heavily monitored underground parking garage beneath the federal building downtown. A dark, unmarked SUV sat idling in the corner of the concrete structure. As I approached, the driver's door swung open, and Special Agent Thomas Reynolds stepped out. Tall, sharply dressed, silver-haired, with the flat, unblinking gaze of a man who'd spent his entire career hunting corporate sociopaths. I parked, grabbed the leather portfolio and a small encrypted titanium hard drive, and walked over. My heels clicked loudly through the cavernous garage, a stark contrast to the agent's total, watchful silence. "Ms. Vanessa," Agent Reynolds said, extending a firm hand, "Mr. Campbell spoke very highly of your forensic work. He tells me you've got a fully wrapped package for us." I shook his hand and passed him the drive. "Everything you need is on that," I said, keeping my voice flat and professional. Over 500 pages of cross-referenced financial ledgers, offshore routing numbers, and direct IP logs tying $12.4 million in stolen client funds directly to Jamal. I've also included the forged court documents he filed this week. Proof that he's actively attempting to extort a minor in order to access a family trust fund and cover his crypto losses. Reynolds plugged the drive into a heavily encrypted federal tablet resting on the SUV's hood, tapped through my security layers, and fell silent. For several long minutes, the only sound in the garage was the low hum of the engine. I watched his eyes move across the files. I knew exactly what he was seeing. Ironclad, undeniable proof of a massive federal crime. A slow, appreciative smile crept across his face. "You built an absolute masterpiece here," he murmured, looking up from the screen. "Normally, when we get a whistleblower tip, it takes my team 6 months just to subpoena the server logs and untangle the shell companies. You handed me the whole spider web, and the spider's already trapped inside it. We've got more than enough probable cause right now to secure a federal warrant for wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft." "Which brings me to the logistics of the arrest," I said, stepping closer. "Jamal is a serious flight risk. The moment he realizes he can't touch my daughter's trust fund, he's going to panic. He's got a second passport and liquid assets tucked away in the Cayman Islands. Send agents to his office Monday morning and he'll already be gone. You need to take him tonight." Reynolds crossed his arms. "Where is he tonight?" "At the annual charity gala at the Oakbridge Country Club," I said, pulling a physical copy of the invitation from my portfolio and handing it over. "My parents are hosting. Half the investors Jamal stole from are in that ballroom right now, sipping champagne. He'll be in a custom tuxedo, feeling completely invincible. His phone, which holds the authenticator apps for his offshore crypto wallets, will be in his pocket. Raid the gala, and you secure the man, the devices, and every possible route of escape, all at once." Reynolds studied the invitation, a calculating glint in his eyes. "A public takedown at an elite country club gets messy," he said. "He tried to steal my 10-year-old daughter to cover his gambling debts," I said, my voice dropping into something cold and quiet. I don't care how messy it gets. I want him in handcuffs, in front of every single member of the high society crowd he values more than his own family. Reynolds looked at my emerald gown and recognized, finally, the total resolve of a mother who'd been pushed well past her breaking point. He closed his tablet and slid the drive into an evidence lockbox. "What time are you scheduled to arrive?" "I walk into the VIP room at exactly 8:30, I said. "Jamal and my parents are going to try to force me to sign the fraudulent adoption papers. I'll keep them occupied." Reynolds nodded sharply. "My tactical team stages unmarked vehicles at the edge of the golf course by 8:15. When the clock hits 8:45, we come through the clubhouse's front doors. Stay clear of the blast radius, Ms. Vanessa. I'll be the one holding the detonator." "I promised you would be," I said. I turned, got back into my car, and finally pointed it toward the Oakbridge Country Club. The trap was fully set. All I had to do now was walk in and watch the rats take the bait. The drive to the club took less than 20 minutes, though every second felt electric. I pulled up to the grand entrance and left my sedan with a slightly startled valet, tucked among a fleet of far more expensive vehicles. I stepped out, smoothed the rich emerald silk of my gown, and walked toward the clubhouse's heavy double doors, already propped open, spilling warm golden light and the soft strains of a live string quartet into the night air. I took one deep breath, gripped the leather portfolio tightly against my side, and climbed the wide stone steps. The ballroom inside was a masterclass in excess. Crystal chandeliers threw a brilliant, sparkling glow over hundreds of the city's most influential people. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos wove through the crowd with silver trays of champagne and caviar. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low murmur of wealthy people discussing their portfolios. As I descended the curved grand staircase and stepped onto the ballroom floor, heads began turning. For years I had shown up to these family events dressed in dull colors, playing the tragic, invisible widow. Tonight, I was impossible to ignore. The emerald gown fit like it had been made for exactly this moment, projecting a quiet, untouchable confidence. I kept my spine straight and my expression unreadable as I moved through the sea of designer dresses and custom-tailored suits. I recognized dozens of faces: real estate developers, tech executives, venture capitalists. These weren't just my parents' wealthy friends. These were the exact people Jamal had been quietly bleeding dry for the past 18 months, laughing and clinking their crystal glasses, completely unaware that their retirement accounts and tax shelters had already gone up in smoke in some offshore crypto scheme. It didn't take long to find my family. They stood near the center of the room, beside a massive ice sculpture, holding court as usual. My father, Richard, was laughing loudly at something a local politician had said, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, radiating the entitled authority of a man who thought he owned the entire building. Beside him stood my mother, Susan, dripping in diamonds worth more than my house. Brittany wore a shimmering gold dress, her arm looped tightly through Jamal's. Jamal himself looked thoroughly pleased with life, dressed in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, flashing an obscenely expensive watch, blissfully unaware that his entire empire was hours from collapse. Susan spotted me first. She tapped Richard's arm and the whole family turned. I watched their expressions shift. A flicker of genuine surprise at my appearance, quickly replaced by a unified, sickeningly smug look of victory. They noticed the leather portfolio in my hand. In their minds, it didn't hold federal whistleblower reports and offshore ledgers. It held signed adoption papers and a name change petition for my daughter. They thought I'd finally broken under the weight of their threats. I walked straight up to their little circle. The politician excused himself, sensing the sudden shift in the air. Richard smiled wide and predatory, like a conqueror admiring a defeated enemy. "Vanessa," he said, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear, "you look surprisingly well put together tonight. I'm glad you finally decided to stop being so stubborn and join us. Family is everything after all. Susan stepped forward, offering a fake, theatrical hug I easily sidestepped, leaning in close instead, her perfume overwhelming. I knew you wouldn't risk your inheritance, she whispered harshly. Hand over the papers and try not to ruin the evening for your sister. Brittany beamed, looking me over with a condescending little smirk. It's the right choice, Vanessa, don't worry. We'll make sure Lily gets the best boarding school money can buy. Jamal stepped into my personal space, practically vibrating with arrogant triumph. Told you my lawyers would crush you, he muttered, adjusting his silk tie. You can't fight real power. Let's get this over with. Richard gestured toward a set of heavy mahogany doors at the far end of the ballroom. The private room's already reserved for us, he announced smoothly. Our counsel is waiting inside to finalize everything. Shall we? I looked at each of them in turn, feeling the weight of the paperwork tucked under my arm and the federal countdown clock ticking somewhere in the back of my mind. Lead the way, I said simply. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind us, instantly cutting off the string quartet and the ballroom's low buzz. The VIP room was suffocatingly opulent, dark oak paneling, thick Persian rugs, and a massive, gleaming walnut conference table dominating the space. At the far end sat two men in identical charcoal gray suits. The family attorney's corporate attack dogs, kept on a very expensive retainer. They didn't stand when I walked in. They just watched me with cold, calculating eyes, treating me not as family or as a grieving widow, but as a minor legal obstacle to be swiftly cleared away. My father took his place at the head of the table, pulling out a grand leather chair as if presiding over a board meeting. Susan and Brittany flanked him, both wearing matching expressions of smug anticipation. Jamal didn't sit. He paced the length of the room, his expensive shoes sinking into the plush rug, riding a high of pure arrogance, utterly convinced he'd trapped me. Have a seat, Vanessa, my father ordered, gesturing to a lone chair deliberately positioned across from the lawyers, a classic interrogation setup, designed to make me feel small and isolated. The lighting was intentionally dim, the shadows deep enough to make the room feel even more claustrophobic. I stayed standing, my posture rigid. I prefer to stand, I said calmly, setting my portfolio down on the smooth walnut surface. Jamal stopped pacing and let out a harsh, mocking laugh before walking over to the lawyers. One of them, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, slid a thick stack of documents across the table. Jamal snatched them up like a winning lottery ticket, marched back over, and slammed the papers down in front of me hard enough to echo through the soundproofed room. We're done playing games, Vanessa, he sneered, leaning across the table to invade my space. The top document was a name change petition. Right beneath it sat an emergency adoption consent form. Both had bright yellow sticky notes marking exactly where I was supposed to sign. You're going to take the pen out of my hand, and you're going to sign every single yellow flag, Jamal commanded, his voice thick with venom. If you don't sign tonight, I promise you, your life becomes a living hell. I already got you suspended from your job. One phone call and I derailed your entire career. By Monday, I finalize your termination. The bank on your mortgage is run by a close friend of mine. No salary, you default. He accelerates the foreclosure. Sign it, or you're homeless by Tuesday. Susan sighed loudly, adjusting her diamond necklace like the whole exchange was exhausting her. Listen to him, Vanessa. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We've already arranged a moving company to help you pack, if that's the path you choose. We can have Lily picked up by a private car tomorrow afternoon. You won't even have to explain anything to her. We'll handle the whole transition smoothly, the way a proper family should. They talked about taking my daughter the way they'd discuss shipping a piece of furniture. The sheer absence of basic human empathy in that room was staggering. Brittany leaned forward, arms crossed over her shimmering gold dress. It really is for the best, she added, dripping fake sympathy. You're clearly unstable. A real mother wouldn't have caused a scene at the elementary school. You can't afford to give her the life she deserves anyway. Jamal and I will make sure she has the best tutors, the best clothes, the best of everything. You should be thanking us for stepping in to clean up the absolute mess you've made of your life. My father chimed in, jabbing a finger in my direction. I paid Judge Mitchell a very significant sum to expedite those papers, Vanessa. The family court system is in my pocket. Refuse to sign, and I will drag you through years of litigation. I will bankrupt you. I will bury you in legal fees until you're begging us to take the child just so you can afford to eat. I glanced at the two lawyers. They sat in complete silence, watching the psychological abuse unfold with blank, practiced expressions. Men paid handsomely to look the other way, while my family tried to extort a mother into surrendering her own child. Jamal pulled a heavy gold fountain pen from his tuxedo pocket and clicked the cap off, thrusting it toward me, the gold nib glinting under the chandelier light. Take the pen, Vanessa, he demanded, his face flushing with impatience. You have zero leverage, no job, no money, no allies. You are completely alone in this room, and we hold every single card. Sign the papers. Now. I didn't reach for the pen. I didn't flinch or shrink from his posturing. I stood perfectly still and let the suffocating silence stretch across the room for several long, deliberate seconds. I watched the arrogance rolling off Jamal's shoulders. I watched my parents look at me with cold, practiced disappointment. I watched my sister waiting eagerly for her cut of a stolen identity. They genuinely believed they'd backed me into an inescapable corner. What they didn't understand was that I was the one who'd locked the door. I didn't take the pen. Instead, I reached into my own leather portfolio, taking my time, letting the silence stretch even further. I pulled out my own thick stack of watermarked legal documents, not printed on ordinary office paper, but bearing the official raised blue seal of the State Superior Court. I set them down on the walnut table, right beside Jamal's fraudulent petitions. The sound was soft, but it carried enough weight to instantly shift the energy in the room. I won't be signing anything tonight, Jamal, I said, my voice level and calm. In fact, I'm the only person in this room holding any legally binding paperwork at all. Jamal scoffed, leaning back slightly but keeping his aggressive stance. What is that, Vanessa? A strongly worded letter from some discount attorney you found online? It's an active, fully executed emergency protective order, I said clearly, shifting my gaze to my sister. Brittany's smug smile faltered instantly. Filed and granted this afternoon by a Superior Court judge, it mandates that you and Jamal stay at least 500 feet away from my daughter and me, effective immediately. The balding lawyer with the wire-rimmed glasses sat up ramrod straight, his professional indifference vanishing in an instant. He leaned forward, squinting at the raised court seal. On what grounds? The second lawyer demanded, his voice suddenly losing its edge. I turned to face them, matching the exact cold detachment they'd shown me a moment earlier. Attempted kidnapping, criminal harassment, and the use of forged judicial documents. Yesterday afternoon, my sister tried to remove my child from school grounds using a temporary guardianship order supposedly signed by Judge Mitchell. I informed the responding officers that no such order existed anywhere in the county's digital registry. Richard slammed a fist on the table. You called the police on your own sister? I did, I said smoothly, and once the officers confirmed the docket number was entirely fabricated, I filed a formal report. I took that report to a Superior Court judge who owes my father no political favors whatsoever. When he saw that all of you had conspired to falsify a family court order in order to forcibly remove a minor from her legal guardian, he signed the restraining order on the spot. The balding lawyer reached out with a trembling hand and pulled my documents toward him. By the second line, a bead of sweat had formed on his forehead. He looked at Jamal, then at my father, his face draining of color. "Richard," he said, voice tight with sudden panic, "did you authorize the creation of a physical guardianship petition outside the electronic filing system?" Richard waved a hand dismissively. "It was a tactical maneuver. We were going to file the digital copies Monday, after Vanessa signed the consent forms. Standard pressure tactic." "It's a felony," the lawyer hissed, all professional composure gone. "Falsifying a judge's signature and presenting it to a school official to seize physical custody of a child is a federal crime. You never told us you actually tried to use unfiled paperwork out in public." "Don't lecture me," Richard growled, his face turning a deep, furious shade of purple. "I pay you thousands of dollars an hour to fix problems, not to quote statutes at me like some law school professor." "I can't fix a documented criminal conspiracy," the lawyer shot back, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to mop his brow. "If this protective order is active, my firm cannot legally advise you to pursue this adoption. It completely invalidates the consent forms Jamal just presented. Frankly, being in this room with you right now could jeopardize my license." The second lawyer pushed his chair back, physically distancing himself from my family. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with a federal kidnapping charge. Jamal gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white, realizing his primary weapon, the threat of financially crushing me in family court, had just been neutralized. A superior court judge had already flagged them as a direct physical threat to my daughter. "You think a piece of paper stops us?" Jamal snarled, dropping every last pretense of the concerned uncle. "You think a restraining order changes the fact that you have no money, no job? I still pulled your strings, Vanessa. I still got you fired. You have absolutely nothing." I smiled. The same predatory smile I'd once given him in a bank lobby. The trap was springing beautifully. The lawyers were terrified. My father was losing his grip on his own legal team, and Jamal was sprinting blindly toward the edge of a cliff he couldn't see. "You really shouldn't brag about sabotaging an auditor, Jamal," I said softly, stepping closer to the table. "Because while you were busy playing games in family court, I was doing my job." I slid my hand into the pocket of my emerald silk gown and drew out my smartphone. I kept my eyes fixed on Jamal the entire time, walking slowly around the edge of the heavy walnut table. The two corporate attorneys instinctively shoved their chairs back, desperate to put physical distance between themselves and the disaster they could already feel coming. I set the phone flat in the center of the polished wood, its screen glowing brightly against the dim light of the VIP room. "What is this?" my father demanded, his authoritative tone wavering for the first time I could ever remember. "Are you trying to record this conversation? Because, as my lawyers will tell you, this is a two-party consent state." "I'm not recording anything right now, Richard," I replied smoothly. "But I did record a very interesting conversation yesterday afternoon. You see, when Brittany ambushed me and my daughter in the elementary school parking lot, she was under a tremendous amount of stress. The flashing lights of the approaching police cruisers really broke her concentration. She forgot to filter her words. She forgot that out in the real world, outside the safety of this country club, you cannot simply buy your way out of a criminal conspiracy." Brittany let out a sharp gasp. The color drained instantly from her perfectly contoured face. She stumbled backward, her expensive gold heels sinking into the Persian rug. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling with sudden, undeniable terror. "You did not." I reached down and tapped the play button on my screen. I had turned the volume all the way up. The audio quality was crystal clear, capturing the ambient noise of the school parking lot and the distant wail of police sirens. But rising above it all was Brittany's hysterical, screeching voice. The recording echoed violently off the dark oak-paneled walls of the VIP room. "Are you really this stupid?" Brittany's recorded voice shrieked, Do you honestly think I want to spend the rest of my life raising your brat? I don't want to go to parent-teacher conferences. I don't want a kid ruining my figure or my house. Susan let out a choked cry, her hand flying up to cover her mouth as she stared at her golden child in absolute horror. The recording kept going, delivering its next blow. Because of the trust fund, you idiot. Grandfather's $15 million trust fund. He set some ridiculous condition before he died. The money only unlocks when a granddaughter named Brittany turns 10 years old. Jamal needs that cash right now. He made bad trades. He lost a lot of client money. If we don't get that $15 million transferred into our accounts by Friday, the federal regulators are going to find out. Jamal is going to federal prison, Vanessa. I hit pause. The silence that fell over the VIP room afterward was deafening, as though every last molecule of oxygen had been sucked out of the space in an instant. The balding attorney shot to his feet so fast that his heavy leather chair crashed to the floor behind him. He didn't even glance back at it. He frantically stuffed legal pads and gold pens into his briefcase. "Richard, we are officially withdrawing as your legal counsel," the lawyer stammered, his hands shaking violently. "This firm will not be party to a documented extortion attempt or a conspiracy to defraud a federal trust. Do not contact our offices again." The two lawyers bolted for the heavy mahogany doors, practically tripping over one another in their scramble to escape the room. My father made no move to stop them. Richard stood frozen at the head of the table, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might actually shatter. Reality had finally pierced his arrogant armor. He wasn't the puppet master orchestrating some clever family transaction anymore. He was an unindicted co-conspirator, caught on tape, attempting to help cover up a multi-million-dollar federal crime. Susan swayed on her feet, looking as if she might genuinely faint. Her flawless high society composure crumbled completely. She turned to Jamal, eyes wide with panic. "You told us it was just a minor liquidity issue," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You told us you just needed a short-term bridge loan from the trust to cover a bad quarter. Federal prison. What did you do, Jamal?" Jamal didn't answer her. He was staring at my phone as though it were a live grenade. The arrogant, untouchable wealth manager who had threatened to make me homeless just 5 minutes earlier was gone. His custom Tom Ford tuxedo suddenly looked 2 sizes too big on him. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving, as the walls of his elaborate criminal empire collapsed inward around him. "You really thought you could steal my daughter to pay off your gambling debts?" I asked, stepping up to the very edge of the table. "You thought a forged piece of paper and a handful of hollow threats would make me surrender my child so you could keep driving your Porsche and wearing your fancy watches." I picked up my phone and slid it back into my pocket. But I wasn't finished. The recording had only been the appetizer. It was time to serve the main course. I reached into my leather portfolio and closed my fingers around the thick spine of the black binder. I pulled it free and let it hit the table with a heavy, deliberate thud. The sheer size of the 500-page document made Jamal take a step back. I picked it up and walked straight toward him. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting toward the mahogany doors. And when he finally understood there was no way out, I stopped just inches from him. I didn't raise my voice, but the certainty in my tone cut cleanly through the air. "You're short $12 million from the pension funds you managed, Jamal," I said, enunciating every single word so the truth could sink in properly. "You incinerated $12 million of your client's money on offshore cryptocurrency margin calls, and you thought my daughter was your bailout plan." I lifted the massive binder and shoved it hard against his chest. He brought his arms up to catch it, but the sheer weight of the Securities and Exchange Commission audit sent him stumbling backward. He gasped and dropped it onto the table where it fell open, spilling out page after page of highlighted wire transfers, IP logs, and offshore routing numbers. Jamal stared down at the open pages, his breath caught in his throat. With trembling fingers, he reached up and yanked violently at his silk tie, desperately trying to loosen his collar. A thin, high-pitched wheeze escaped his lips. His chest was heaving rapidly now as a full-blown panic attack seized his entire body. The arrogant facade was completely stripped away, leaving nothing behind but a terrified, broken criminal watching his whole life end in real time. "What is she talking about?" my father demanded, stepping toward the table. Richard's eyes scanned the highlighted numbers on the spreadsheets, and his face went completely slack. "These are the corporate accounts for the Apex Capital pension funds," Richard whispered, his voice trembling as he recognized the names of his own wealthy friends scattered across the list of defrauded clients. "Jamal, what did you do?" "I'll tell you exactly what he did," I said, turning to face my father. "Your son-in-law set up a shell company in Delaware called Blue Horizon Holdings. He used it to quietly siphon client funds in increments just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. Then he wired the money to the Cayman Islands and gambled it away on unregulated digital assets. Every last dime is gone. He is completely broke." Brittany let out a long, agonized wail. She rushed to the table and grabbed Jamal by the arm, shaking him. "Tell me she's lying," Brittany screamed, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "Tell me you didn't lose our money. Tell me they aren't going to take the house." Jamal couldn't speak. He was gasping for air, his eyes wide and unblinking as he stared down at the financial autopsy of his own criminal enterprise, leaning so heavily against the table that his legs nearly gave out beneath him. "It isn't just your house, Brittany," I explained calmly, watching my sister unravel completely. "The federal government will seize everything purchased with those stolen funds: your luxury cars, your designer bags, your jewelry, your bank accounts. The IRS Criminal Division is going to freeze all of your assets by Monday morning to begin restitution. You are not sending my daughter to some elite boarding school. You're going to be standing in line at the public defender's office, trying to figure out how to keep your husband out of a federal penitentiary." Susan let out a horrifying sob and collapsed into one of the heavy leather chairs. The social standing she had valued above everything else in the world, the reputation she'd been willing to sacrifice my daughter for, was about to be obliterated entirely. She turned to Richard, her face a mask of pure terror. "Richard, do something," she pleaded. "Call someone. Call the bank. We have to fix this before it gets out." I looked at my parents and felt a deep, unexpected sense of closure settle over me. There was nothing left for them to fix. No amount of money or political leverage could erase a $12 million federal embezzlement case that had already been fully documented and handed over to the authorities. They had tied their legacy to a fraud, and now they were going down with it. But it was Jamal who truly understood the weight of what was happening. He finally managed to catch his breath and looked up at me with eyes full of pure, unfiltered fear. "You gave this to the authorities," he whispered, his voice cracked and broken. "I didn't just give it to them, Jamal," I replied, checking the time on my phone. "I made absolutely sure they knew exactly where to find you tonight." I turned away from him, leaving him gasping for air over the massive stack of incriminating evidence. I walked past my father, his face frozen in a mask of absolute horror, and headed straight for the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP room. Richard finally found his voice and stepped forward, grabbing my arm hard enough to hurt. "Vanessa, stop right now," Richard hissed, his fingers digging painfully into the silk of my gown. "You cannot do this. We can still handle this internally. We'll liquidate assets. We'll pay the clients back quietly. Do not destroy this family over a misunderstanding." I yanked my arm free with enough force to send him stumbling backward into the conference table. "You destroyed this family the moment you tried to steal my daughter," I said, staring him down. "Now I'm just taking out the trash." I grabbed the brass handles and threw the heavy doors wide open. The vibrant sounds of the charity gala flooded into the suffocating VIP room. The string quartet had just taken a break, and the master of ceremonies stood at a podium a few feet away, preparing to announce the silent auction winners. A sleek wireless microphone waited in its silver stand. The ballroom was packed with the wealthiest people in the city. The very people who had entrusted their entire fortunes to my brother-in-law. I walked out of the VIP room and stepped straight onto the low stage. The master of ceremonies gave me a confused look and tried to block my path, but I didn't wait for an invitation. I reached out and pulled the microphone firmly from its stand. The sharp squeal of feedback ripped through the massive ballroom, instantly cutting through the polite chatter and the clink of crystal champagne glasses. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage, expressions shifting from mild annoyance to curious anticipation. I looked out over the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, picking out the faces of tech executives and real estate tycoons whose names appeared explicitly in my forensic audit. I glanced back toward the VIP room. Jamal stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. Brittany gripped his arm, looking as though she might vomit on her gold dress at any moment. My parents stood paralyzed in the shadows of the room, terrified of the bright lights waiting just beyond it. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice carrying loud and clear through the state-of-the-art sound system. "For those who don't know me, my name is Vanessa. I'm Richard's daughter, and I'm a senior forensic accountant. I apologize for interrupting the festivities, but there is an urgent financial matter tonight that requires the immediate attention of several guests in this room." The ballroom went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished marble floor. "If you are currently a client of Apex Capital, specifically managed by Jamal, I need you to listen very carefully," I continued, holding direct eye contact with a prominent venture capitalist standing in the front row. "Over the last 18 months, your wealth manager has not been investing your money in conservative municipal bonds or blue-chip stocks. He has been systematically embezzling your funds through a Delaware shell company called Blue Horizon Holdings." A collective gasp tore through the elite crowd. I watched 3 separate billionaires yank their smartphones out of their tuxedo pockets to check their banking apps in a panic. Jamal took a desperate step out of the VIP room, both hands raised as though he could physically stop a speeding train. "She's lying," he croaked, his voice barely carrying over the sudden panicked murmur of the crowd. "She's a disgruntled family member. Don't listen to her. Everything is fine. I am a forensic auditor who just handed a 500-page ledger of your offshore cryptocurrency margin calls to the Federal Bureau of Investigation," I countered, my voice booming through the speakers and drowning him out entirely. "He stole $12.4 million of your money and burned it on unregulated digital assets. He is completely broke." The murmur turned into a low, angry roar. The venture capitalist in the front row let his champagne glass slip from his fingers. It shattered violently on the floor, and nobody so much as flinched. "But it gets worse," I said, pushing my voice louder still to cut through the rising chaos. To cover up his massive federal crimes, Jamal and my sister Brittany attempted to legally kidnap my 10-year-old daughter today. They forged court documents with the help of my father, Richard, who paid off a corrupt judge. Their plan was to force through an illegal adoption and change my daughter's name in order to unlock a $15 million family trust fund before the SEC could audit Jamal's accounts. The crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. The high society Polish of the charity gala was obliterated in a matter of seconds. Wealthy investors shouted aggressively into their phones, dialing attorneys on speaker and demanding answers. Several men in expensive suits started advancing toward the VIP room, their faces flushed with righteous fury. My parents stood paralyzed in the doorway, their pristine reputation dismantled in front of the only people whose opinion had ever mattered to them. Susan buried her face in her trembling hands, sobbing as her wealthy friends looked at her with open disgust. Richard clutched at his chest, looking like he might genuinely be having a heart attack as the reality of his public execution finally set in. Jamal saw the angry investors closing in fast and retreated into the VIP room, frantically searching for a rear exit that did not exist. I stood on the stage holding the microphone, watching the total destruction of the people who thought they could ruin my life. I had burned their fake empire to the ground, and there wasn't a single thing left they could do to put out the flames. I lowered the microphone and set it carefully back on the silver stand. The chaotic roar of the ballroom behind me was a symphony of wealthy investors demanding restitution and dialing their legal teams all at once. I stepped off the low stage and walked slowly back toward the open mahogany doors of the VIP room. I didn't run. I didn't rush. I moved through the fury like a ghost, and the crowd parted for me without a word. Inside the dim room, the reality of their ruin was starting to sink in. But my sister wasn't ready to surrender. Delusion is a powerful drug for a narcissist who has just been cornered by the truth. Brittany shoved past Jamal, her gold dress catching the light spilling in from the ballroom as she stepped aggressively into my path. Her face was streaked with black mascara, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. "You think you've won?" Brittany screamed, a trembling finger jabbing at my face. "You think a bunch of angry rich people are going to stop us? Jamal might go to jail, but I'm still getting that money. Grandfather left that trust fund for me. It has my name on it. I'll hire my own lawyers. I'll forge the adoption papers myself if I have to. The second I secure that $15 million, I'm buying my way out of this mess and leaving you with nothing." I stopped walking. I looked at my sister, watching her cling desperately to the last remaining shred of her fractured reality. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt only a deep, profound pity for the hollow shell of a person standing in front of me. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. "You're not getting a single dime, Brittany," I said softly, my voice perfectly steady over the roar of the crowd behind me. She let out a scoffing, breathless sound. "You don't control the trust, Vanessa. You can't stop the executor from releasing my funds." "You're right," I replied, folding my arms across my emerald gown. "I don't control the executor. That's exactly why I paid him a visit yesterday morning, while you and Jamal were busy playing family court games. I brought him the police report from the elementary school. I brought him the forged emergency custody petition. And I brought him the audio recording of you confessing to a criminal conspiracy." Brittany blinked, her manic energy faltering as confusion crept across her tear-streaked face. "Grandfather was a deeply paranoid man," I explained, taking a step closer. "He anticipated that a large sum of money might attract parasites. He knew you were greedy, Brittany. He simply hoped you'd eventually outgrow it. So when he drafted the trust, he didn't just require a granddaughter named Brittany Jr. He buried an ironclad, non-negotiable bad actor clause deep in the final pages of the addendum." My father looked up sharply from his chair, his eyes widening in horror. He knew exactly what a bad actor clause meant in a high-level corporate trust. The clause states that if any designated beneficiary attempts to defraud, manipulate, or extort the estate, their claim is instantly voided, I continued, making sure my parents heard every single word. But grandfather went a step further. He explicitly wrote that if a beneficiary commits a felony against a minor in an attempt to accelerate the trust, they are permanently disinherited. By forging a judge's signature and attempting to legally kidnap my 10-year-old daughter to trigger the payout, you activated that clause, Brittany. You disqualified yourself the moment you walked into that school parking lot. Brittany shook her head rapidly, backing away from me. "No," she gasped. "No, that's my money. He loved me best." "He loved his legacy," I corrected coldly. "And because you violated the core terms of the trust, the estate bylaws mandate an immediate default. The $15 million bypasses you completely. It transfers automatically to the next direct bloodline descendant of the required generation. I watched the exact moment her brain finally finished the math. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "That's right," I whispered, delivering the final devastating truth. "The 15 million belongs to Lily now. And because Lily is a minor, the trust defaults to her sole surviving legal guardian, me. I am the untouchable trustee of the very fortune you committed federal crimes trying to steal. You didn't secure your future, Brittany. You just handed me $15 million. Brittany let out a guttural, agonized scream. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the thick Persian rug, tearing at her gold dress as a complete psychological breakdown swallowed her whole. Jamal didn't even look at her. He stood staring blankly at the wall, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his defeat. They had sacrificed their family, their freedom, and whatever humanity they had left for a payout that was never coming. I stood over them, entirely untouched by their misery, holding the ultimate victory in my hands. The heavy silence inside the VIP room was suddenly shattered by a harsh sweep of color. Through the tall, sheer curtains of the country club windows, the night sky lit up violently. Red and blue lights strobed across the dark oak-paneled walls, painting my parents' terrified faces in alternating shades of crimson and sapphire. The chaotic roar of the wealthy investors out in the grand ballroom abruptly shifted. The sounds of angry threats and frantic phone calls dissolved into a collective gasp of genuine alarm. I turned my head toward the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the main entrance of the Oakbridge Country Club. A fleet of massive, unmarked black SUVs jumped the pristine front curb, completely ignoring the circular valet driveway. Tires screeched against the pavement, leaving thick black skid marks across the manicured concrete. Before the vehicles had even fully stopped, the heavy doors swung open, and dozens of men and women in dark tactical windbreakers, bold yellow lettering stamped across their backs, poured out into the cool night air. FBI, Criminal Investigation Division. My father stumbled toward the window, pressing his trembling hands flat against the thick glass, watching in absolute disbelief as federal agents stormed the front steps of his exclusive sanctuary. For 40 years, Richard had believed the massive wooden doors of this club protected him from the consequences of the real world. That wealth was some kind of magical shield that made him invisible to the law. That illusion was being shattered right in front of him by the heavy boots of federal law enforcement marching across the marble foyer. Susan let out a high-pitched shriek and backed into the corner of the room, knocking a silver tray of crystal water glasses to the floor. The glass shattered, and nobody moved to clean it up. Brittany was still on the rug, clutching at her ruined gold dress, sobbing hysterically as the strobing lights flashed across her tear-stained face. She looked, in that moment, like a spoiled child who had finally been told no for the first time in her life, entirely incapable of processing the nightmare unfolding around her. Jamal remained completely frozen. He didn't run. He didn't try to hide. The total paralysis of defeat held him firmly in place as he stared blankly at the mahogany doors, waiting for the inevitable. The heavy double doors of the grand ballroom burst open with deafening force. The federal agents didn't pause to politely ask for directions or check in with the terrified event coordinator. They moved with brutal, practiced efficiency, a tactical team forming a hard perimeter around every exit to make sure no one could leave the building. The wealthy investors, men and women used to giving orders and demanding instant respect, instinctively backed away, pressing themselves flat against the walls to clear a path. Leading the primary entry team was Special Agent Thomas Reynolds. He looked even more intimidating under the crystal chandeliers than he had in the dark parking garage the day before. He strode through the sea of designer gowns and custom tuxedos without giving a single billionaire a second glance, his eyes locked dead ahead, scanning the room until they found the open mahogany doors of our VIP suite. I held my ground as Agent Reynolds and 6 heavily armed agents marched directly toward me and crossed the threshold of the VIP room, their tactical gear a stark, violent contrast against the opulent Persian rugs and polished walnut furniture. Reynolds walked straight past my father, ignoring Richard's frantic attempt to introduce himself and demand a phone call to his lawyer. He walked past my mother, cowering in the shadows. He walked right past me, too, offering only a single, barely perceptible nod of professional acknowledgement. The agents fanned out swiftly in a semicircle, completely surrounding Jamal. The physical space around him vanished in an instant. There was nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide, and no one left to manipulate. The untouchable wealth manager was officially cornered. "Jamal!" Agent Reynolds barked, his voice echoing through the enclosed space with an authority that made Jamal physically flinch. The federal agent reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick stack of folded documents, holding them up beneath the strobing light spilling in through the window. "I am Special Agent Reynolds with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced, reading from the official paperwork. "We are executing a federal arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court. You are hereby being detained on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. Furthermore, agents from the Internal Revenue Service are currently at your primary residence, executing a search and seizure warrant for all physical and digital assets." Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His throat worked convulsively. The reality of it, the specific mention of wire fraud, of money laundering, finally cut through his state of shock. He looked down at his own trembling hands, the same hands that had forged custody documents to try to steal my daughter. The trap had slammed shut completely. He was no longer the arrogant king of the financial district. He was just another criminal caught in the act. 2 heavily armed agents stepped forward, grabbing Jamal by the shoulders and spinning him around to face the dark oak-paneled wall. He offered zero resistance. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs echoing through the VIP room sounded louder somehow than the string quartet ever had. They pulled his arms forcefully behind his back, cold metal biting into the cuffs of his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. The image of the high-powered wealth manager being cuffed like a common street thug was broadcast clearly through the open mahogany doors. Out in the grand ballroom, the wealthy investors weren't yelling anymore. They stood in stunned silence, a sea of illuminated smartphone screens recording every single second of his public unraveling. Jamal kept his head bowed, unable to meet the eyes of the billionaires whose money he had burned. The finality of the handcuffs snapping shut finally broke through Brittany's own shock. She scrambled up off the Persian rug, her ruined gold dress tangling around her legs, and lunged toward the federal agents with her manicured hands curled into claws. "Get your hands off my husband!" she shrieked, her voice climbing to a pitch that made the investors nearest the doorway physically wince. "You can't do this to us. Do you know who we are? Do you know who my father is?" One of the IRS officials stepped smoothly into her path, a firm hand raised to block her advance. "Step back, ma'am," he warned, his tone strictly professional but carrying a lethal undertone beneath it. "Do not interfere with a federal arrest." Brittany spun wildly toward my father. "Daddy, fix this!" she screamed, stomping her foot against the floor like a spoiled toddler mid-tantrum. "Call the governor, call the judge, pay them whatever they want, tell them to let him go right now." Richard straightened his jacket, desperately trying to salvage whatever tiny fraction of authority he still believed he possessed, and stepped up to Agent Reynolds, puffing out his chest. "Listen here, Agent," Richard commanded, using the deep, booming voice that usually made junior executives cower. "I am hosting this charity gala. You are trespassing on private property, and you are making a massive mistake. I will have your badge for this stunt. My lawyers will tear this department apart." Agent Reynolds didn't so much as blink. He regarded Richard with an expression of profound boredom. "We already spoke to your lawyers, sir," the agent replied smoothly. "They resigned. As of 20 minutes ago, they formally withdrew their representation of you and your family, citing your direct involvement in a conspiracy to defraud a federal trust and the use of forged judicial documents." Richard froze, his mouth hanging open. Agent Reynolds pulled a second document from his tactical jacket. "Furthermore, we've traced the registration of the fraudulent Delaware Shell Company directly to a commercial property owned and managed by your primary real estate holding firm. You provided the physical infrastructure for a $12 million money laundering operation." Susan let out another horrified gasp, clutching Richard's arm as her knees buckled slightly. Agent Reynolds turned his gaze on my mother. "As of this exact moment, the Internal Revenue Service has placed a hard freeze on all of your personal and corporate assets," he told her flatly. "Your bank accounts, your investment portfolios, your properties, all of it is locked pending a full federal audit. You are officially under investigation as accomplices to federal wire fraud. If you attempt to transfer a single dime, you will both be joining your son-in-law in federal custody tonight." The words hung in the air, heavier than the physical handcuffs still locked around Jamal's wrists. Susan looked out into the grand ballroom, at the elite socialites she had spent 40 years trying desperately to impress. The very people she had valued more than her own daughter, staring back at her now with nothing but disgust. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The family name was transformed, in a matter of minutes, from a symbol of high society power into a toxic punchline. They weren't the kings and queens of the country club anymore. They were radioactive. Jamal was marched roughly out of the VIP room and paraded through the center of the ballroom as the investors stepped back from him, treating him as though he carried something contagious. Brittany trailed close behind, weeping loudly and uncontrollably, completely stripped of her golden child armor. Richard and Susan stayed trapped in the VIP room, surrounded by the wreckage of their pristine reputation, staring out at a world that had just finished rejecting them entirely. I stood perfectly still, watching the empire burn, knowing full well that I was the one who had struck the match. 1 year has passed since that night at the Oakbridge Country Club. The ashes of their empire have long since scattered, carried away by the relentless machinery of the federal justice system. The fallout from the charity gala was swift, brutal, and thoroughly public. Jamal never got the luxury of a dramatic, drawn-out trial. The forensic dossier I handed over to the FBI and the SEC was so overwhelmingly comprehensive that his court-appointed defense attorney advised him to take an immediate plea deal. He is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. There are no custom Tom Ford suits behind those walls, and certainly no $50,000 watches to flash in front of the guards. His days now run on a rigid, regimented schedule, stripped entirely of the arrogant power he once wielded so carelessly. The man who once threatened to make me homeless now lives inside an 8x10 concrete cell. As for my sister and my parents, their downfall was every bit as complete and every bit as humiliating. The IRS Criminal Division made good on its promise. Because my father had used his commercial real estate holding firm to anchor Jamal's offshore money laundering operation, the federal government seized nearly everything under civil asset forfeiture law. Their sprawling suburban mansion, the very house where they had tried to rewrite my daughter's identity, was seized and sold at a public government auction to begin repaying their defrauded investors. My parents were expelled entirely from their elite social circles. The country club formally revoked their membership, and the wealthy friends they had spent decades trying to impress erased them from their contact lists overnight. Today, Richard, Susan, and Brittany all share a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of the city. Brittany, the former golden child who once believed she was unconditionally entitled to $15 million, now works the front desk at a discount dental clinic just to help cover rent. There is no more talk of elite boarding schools, luxury European vacations, or high society dinners. They are trapped now in a prison entirely of their own making, suffocating under the weight of their shattered egos and the mundane reality of the very poverty they use to openly mock. They have never once reached out to me, and I have never once looked back. Meanwhile, my own life has completely transformed. When the dust finally settled on the Apex Capital scandal, Mr. Campbell called me into the executive boardroom. This time, he wasn't handing me a suspension notice. Instead, he slid a full partnership agreement across the table. By exposing the fraud before it could officially implicate our mutual clients, I had saved the firm from catastrophic legal liability and public embarrassment. I was promoted to full partner almost immediately, securing a financial future far brighter than anything I'd previously dared imagine. I no longer sit in a small cubicle poring over spreadsheets. I have a sprawling corner office now, with a beautiful view of the downtown skyline. The $15 million trust fund, which legally defaulted to Lily under my grandfather's strict bad actor clause, remains securely locked inside a highly conservative financial portfolio. As her sole trustee, I make sure every penny is heavily protected, waiting patiently for the day she is ready to build a legacy entirely her own. But we are not sitting around waiting for the future to start enjoying our lives. Lily and I have spent this past year thriving in absolute peace. We spent the entire summer traveling through Europe, eating authentic gelato along the Amalfi Coast, and wandering through the ancient ruins of Rome. She is a happy, brilliant 11-year-old girl who knows exactly who she is, and she knows, without a shadow of a doubt, that her mother will move mountains to protect her from anyone who ever tries to cause her harm. I built an impenetrable fortress around my small family of two, using the very professional tools my parents once mocked so endlessly, and it bought us our absolute freedom. I look back now on that terrible Sunday barbecue, on the exact moment they handed my daughter that custom-embroidered pink silk dress, and I feel nothing but profound gratitude for the chilling clarity it eventually gave me. The journey was incredibly painful. It forced me to confront the reality that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had only ever valued me as a pawn in their own twisted games. But stepping out of their shadow was the very thing that let me discover my true strength. They thought they could erase my daughter's identity for a payout. Instead, I erased their entire legacy. Have you ever used